delighted that finally, after about 10 years, we've managed to get Claudia here to come and join us. I know that she's been very, very busy. I jest, of course. But just to give you a little bit of background, Claudia's had an association with Consalia for quite a number of years, being involved a little bit in our master's programs, but her speciality is very much around coaching. And she's got some very interesting ideas to share with us about that particular topic. But before we get started into the questions, I wonder, Claudia, if we could welcome you to the program, and perhaps you could say just a few words about yourself, a bit about your background, why this interest in coaching, to give us a bit more context before we go into the specifics of the topic for today.
Yeah, thanks, Phil, for the invite. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And I always find these podcasts or talks an opportunity just to reflect and for my own learning. So in terms of my work and background, coaching is really very central now. I have to say I always dread the question a bit to introduce myself because I do so many things and I have such broad interests. And what I realized is coaching is really the core, coaching and learning and developing. And so I work with individuals, I work with teams. I'm also involved in coach training, coach education. So that really changed my view on coaching as well, being involved in the learning process of coaching. And I also supervise coaches. So that's sort of my portfolio in the broadest sense, which includes workshops, consultancies, etc. But the coaching approach is really the central piece. And my background, as many of the people associated with Consalia, is sales. So sales in initially the media industry and then in IT at Oracle, business development, and for many years sales development. So sales training, sales development, and sales leadership development. And and then for 15 years ago, really, I started to get involved in coaching with my own masters in coaching at Oxford Brookes, and then combined my private practice with, not private with private clients, but more with companies. So my own business with teaching at Brookes University as well, in coaching, mentoring, business, and careers is also a special area of my interest. So I think that's maybe enough. Just you can probably pick up the audience from the accent. I'm from Germany originally, so that sort of cross-cultural experience is also important to me, and I just really enjoy working in the international context.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and I think that what's been interesting from my point of view is to sort of follow you developing your career over the years since we met quite a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And also seeing how you have really developed your practice in coaching, and with some quite innovative approaches to coaching, which I hope we can talk about on this podcast, because we have had a number of people talk about coaching in the past as well. We know it's a hugely important topic. It's often the module that we have on our master's program that students really appreciate. I think that kind of opens their eyes a little bit to what coaching should be, as opposed to perhaps what they thought it should be. And I'm really interested to kind of talk to you about this, because I think you really are one of the the UK's thought leaders actually on this topic. So I hope you don't mind me saying that, but that's my perception, at least.
Yeah, I guess it's the length of experience, right? I've been involved in this for 15 years in practice and also in the academic world and research. So it's been really interesting to go into real depth on that. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, well, I know there was a couple of areas that we wanted to kind of I was particularly interested in talking about, which goes into some of the specific techniques of coaching that you've developed around visualization techniques and constellation kind of practices.
Mm.
But before we do that, I just wonder whether we should just have a conversation about what do we mean by coaching, and where do you see its application, I think, in the context of the world in which we're now living. So perhaps we could just start with a bit of context setting as well around the general theme of coaching and why you think it's so relevant in this world that we live in today.
Yeah, so I'll keep the kind of definition quite short. There's a lot people can reach up on, and there've been other podcasts and things. So, but I think what people often overlook is that coaching is a developmental relationship. So it's not just the doing the coaching, but it's sort of why do you coach? It's sometimes for short-term business outcomes, but it's really to develop the person to do things differently, think about their behaviors, increase their self-awareness, and really become their own coach. And that is the core approach of my work, that my purpose is really for people to become their own coach. So their thinking can shift, their perspectives, they're updating their frame of reference, etc. So I think that's just really important in business, because often people see it as a means to an end to achieve a certain outcome, maybe short-term behavior changes, but it actually has the potential to be so much more than issue-based coaching. It can be developmental. And that links us to the second part of your question, actually. Yeah.
Can I just pick up on the first part then before we go to the second part of the question? Because from our perspective, when we have sales managers go through the leadership development programs that we run, when it comes to coaching, they do talk about, spending one-on-one time, with their salespeople. But our experience has been that their perceptions of this one-on-one time, which they often link to coaching, is really around specific deals, sort of deal-related discussions, which picks up on your point about issues, specific topics.
Yeah.
And it's the purpose and the objectives of those one-on-one conversations is not developmental. It's more to do with, to what extent can we predict this particular deal coming in this quarter or in the following quarter. So it actually bears no relation, I don't think, to this notion of coaching from a developmental point of view. Yes, it might be about what could you do to bring this deal in, but it's not so much to do with the coaching of the person. It's really the coaching of the opportunity, if you know what I mean. But I don't know if that's something that you've observed in some of your practices and perceptions of what coaching, what people think is coaching. But
it's lots in there, actually, we can talk about. So it's a really interesting question, because I would say, I would ask the question, can you really separate it? Can you just coach the opportunity, the thing at hand, the task at hand? Because I think, because the conversation is always about change, doing things differently, moving, unblocking, using unused resources, opportunities, who else needs to support, what can support. That does shift the thinking and the perspectives and the learning that is there for the future. So, and I think the other question it raises is the leader as the coach, the sales manager as a coach. It's a very specific context, and of course, there people easily move also into the directive space. Where it's more about performance management and where it's about being more in that line manager role. So shifting between that, from being directive, being more of a mentor, being to coaching, that's one of the key skills of the particularly the sales coaching context, that situational flexibility and fluidity. And I would propose the view that even if you just do small issue-based coaching, it's also developmental, because it does build the
Okay.
person's capacity to solve, prevent that issue is happening again, that they think, etc. So that's what I mean in terms of there's always learning involved. There's always development, and there is sort of in the world of coaching how people offer their services. There are specific people who very, very specifically focus on developmental coaching and are very much focused on the person, and a lot of leadership coaching is in that area. But so that's what I would propose, that it's quite hard to totally separate it, and often time decides, because there's only so much time for a conversation.
Okay, that's good, because I again, when we talk to different clients, and I'll come back to the second part of our question a bit later on, because I think this is kind of moving on to the leader as a coach comment that you've actually mentioned, because we've come across some companies who believe that the role of a sales manager is actually not to be a coach, and they have a separate coach. I think you describe it as a coaching pod, potentially, or companies have coaching pods. They're people that can act as coaches that support sales managers. And so, and I know that this kind of comment generates an awful lot of discussion about whether or not you do need to train sales managers in how to coach. If the sales managers are there to hit numbers, to hit targets, and it's much more about performance kind of management, like you've mentioned, rather than coaching the individual. So I know that some companies actually separate the two functions, because sometimes you do want someone who's neutral, who's not your manager, to be there as someone to act in a coaching capacity. So I can see the benefits of both systems, actually. But I know you've defined it probably in a much more tighter way than me. So
it's actually in one of the articles. So it depends also a bit on the maturity of the organization, the coaching maturity of the organization. Is it so you can talk about coaching as a behavior, an approach, a form of engagement, or is coaching like a formal intervention to develop talent, to manage performance, etc., where you might employ someone outside or inside, or there's companies who have dedicated sales coaches that have a very specific remit. So there is a big spectrum of how you can use coaching, and in particular you can complement it as well. So I think what is really important, just to follow up on our previous discussion around issue-based coaching and developmental coaching, I think what's quite important is that there is an agreement of what is this in service of, and what's the nature of this conversation. Is it a quick and what does especially the coachee need out of the conversation as well? So is it a quick conversation about really fixing the issue at hand, or is it about longer term patterns that repeat and that will play out again next year? So that's very important in the collaboration of people, that they really know how they work together and what is the purpose of a conversation, even if it's quite short. So having that initial the starting point is really important, to agree that, to contract, we call that in coaching language, which sounds a bit formal, but it's just having a 2-sentence, what like in the grow model, what do you want to get out of this conversation? Do you need to let off steam? Do you need to get my advice? Do you need to think something through? But also, what does the manager need as well? What do they need out of the conversation? Is it a coaching conversation or not?
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, I'm currently myself going through the ILM Level 5 coaching accreditation. So, and it's for me, it's been quite an interesting kind of journey, sort of coming into a formal kind of developmental sort of learning about coaching, and it's been very eye-opening. And I mean, the area that that I focused on is around sales transformation, because this is what we do. It's about sort of sales transformation. So I've taken a particular approach, and you may tell me this is wrong. So I don't mind you telling me if this is wrong, by the way, on air. But I really want to coach people and leaders, mainly sales leaders, who are interested in this notion of transformation, and it at three levels. It's at personal transformation, is it at organizational transformation, and I don't really want to engage with people who are not interested themselves or want coaching in that area. So I've sort of defined my own practice into something quite specific. So I'd be very interested to hear whether or not you're thinking I'm thinking on okay lines here as a coaching practice. But
yeah, that's what I mean, that clarity. What is it you offer? Especially if it's more, so there is on the job, in the corridor coaching, and then now, hybrid as well, and in Zoom calls or whatever it is, formal, informal. But when you talk about your coaching practice, that's the more formal relationship where you have working agreements, etc. So that's very important that people know what you offer, what kind of coach you are, that you can articulate that. That brings us to this learning journey as a coach. It's not just about coaching, but also what kind of coach are you? What's your coaching approach, your coaching style? What's your signature? What strengths are you bringing to coaching?
Okay.
So and that's what you're formulating.
Yes. Yeah.
And who is it for? So you're locating your practice, who is it for? Who will benefit? So that's really useful to narrow
to have
that.
defined it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. And I suppose if one sort of takes the sporting analogies of coaches, you have coaches that specialize in defense or attack or midfield, and you normally have a collection of different types of coaches focused on different different areas of particular functionality, I suppose. But I think that the underpinning philosophy that you alluded to at the very beginning about developmental coaching and learning sort of runs through whatever type of practice you might be wanting to develop or specialize in.
Yeah. So I mean, there is a specific practice around, people position themselves as developmental coaches. But the point was really about that whatever we do, it's an intervention. Any conversation is an intervention that is developmental. And I think in a way, this kind of terminology is almost something that is important for you to know, what kind of coach you are, what informs you. And that's where the courses come in. Doing formal coaching courses help you to investigate that, to understand what is there, what have I overlooked, how could I broaden my natural approach, and the kind of words you use to position it. That's then a different story. So so the way you described it is very much like what your audience, that the language of your audience, and people would know what to expect in terms of working with you. And I think, just to say, I mean, it's for marketing, it's much easier to have a niche of coaching. So it's much easier to position your offer.
Yes.
That's my issue at the beginning. I'm very much a generalist coach, and I finally found a word to describe that, which is versatile. So, it's sort of working in lots of different sectors, industries, functions, seniority, geographies, and sort of my niche is that the very versatile coaching and adapting to the need of the client and the situation.
Okay, well, that's great. So I think we've sort of spoken a little bit about sort of defining a little bit about what coaching is and isn't, and perhaps and what makes, I guess, what makes an effective coach is a topic that we could talk about as well. But I did mention earlier on about some of your areas of techniques of coaching,
Yeah.
which I found really interesting, because I think quite often we talk about the grow model. You might have a point of view about that as well. But I'm particularly interested in this visualization and constellation words because they've intrigued me. So maybe I could hand over to you now to talk about those.
Yeah, I will. And, and I've set myself the challenge of not using individuals. Obviously, a lot of people are listening to this on the podcast, but really describing a visual method verbally. Before that, just to say, grow is great. It works. It's been used for a long time. So if people get into the coaching, it really is a wonderful starting point because it gives you that process. I highly recommend that, to start there and continue using it. So, my journey really went on looking left and right, what interested me, how could I develop my practice? And that brings me a bit to part of your first question around coaching today. What has coaching to offer? And so the systemic and visual methods, I'll explain in a moment, I got really interested in that because it personally resonates with me, but also because there are tools and methods that are just so useful to work in complex situations. So they're really reduced. So the idea of the methods is to reduce complexity. So we go to the issue, the core, the essence of the issue, the challenge, or the opportunity, right? So we're in the sales context. So making the most of opportunities is equally important as thinking about challenges. And that's what the systemic methods do. So they give the big picture, but then really go into the detail in terms of the underlying issues. What are the underlying challenges? What's below the waterline? The dynamics that we're not seeing that cause issues and symptoms, etc. So that's what it allows us to investigate, and then turning this insight, this analysis, into action. And I'll just explain that a little bit with a little bit of sort of education on coaching as well. So the systemic methods really work a little bit with, I heard a very nice analogy from Peter Hawkins, one of the prolific coaching writer as well. So he was talking about if you have a toxic pond where the water is poisoned, you can't just take out the fish, clean it, and put it back in. You really need to consider what's around it. And that's what systemic coaching helps in terms of not just looking at the person, but looking at the context as well. What are the contextual dynamics around it? Organizational, economics, cultural, whatever it is. So a bit like these management tools, PESL analysis, etc. But the second aspect, and that's often misunderstood or not quite sort of not talked about so much when people talk about systemic coaching, the tradition of systemic coaching that comes from the constellations work, I'll explain a bit more in a moment, is really coming from the assumption that we have on person-centered coaching as well, that the person holds the answer. So in person-centered coaching, that comes out of the humanistic tradition, we use coaching and not mentoring because we believe that the person holds the answer, but they might not yet be able to articulate it to themselves or haven't sort of have had the realization. And that's where the systemic methods are really useful because they help us visualize pre-verbal knowledge. So it's the things we know, but we don't know yet we know. So other terms that you might have heard are tacit knowledge, implicit knowledge. So it's the things we might not really be able to put our fingers on what really is the underlying issue, or how can we make the most out of these conflicting opportunities? Why do we go round in circles around these problems? But we can work at the visual level in terms of externalizing our inner story, our inner landscapes, our inner pictures of what the nature of the issue is. And that's where the systemic methods come in. And actually, I haven't finished the point. So what I was going to say is this unconditional positive regard we hold to the person. The systemic approach holds that to the system. So the idea is that the solution is already within the system. So if we balance out the system and the systemic resources, then we come to a solution. And what I mean with balancing out can be unblocking things, for example, personal conflicts people might have, unblocking relationships, recognizing unused resources, recognizing unhelpful dynamics out of loyalties, for example, like, mergers, acquisitions, restructuring, maybe grudges people hold from the past, or identities they haven't shifted from the small startup to the big corporate they're now part of. These things can hold people back, or loyalties, who owes what to whom. All these dynamics can hold things back and be in the way of really, in any problem situation, that a solution can be found. So by seeing these and making them visible through the systemic methods, we can analyze it and then turn insight into actions. So it gives us a different perspective. So that was a very long answer, but there's
It's a
a lot
great
in
answer.
it.
Really,
Yeah.
no, I found it fascinating. And I was reflecting a bit on the comment you made about whether you think the individual has the potential, has the answer within them,
Yeah.
and you wanting it to surface, sort of versus the well, I'll come on to the versus bit in a minute. My first question is, how do you know whether the individual has the answer within them? I mean, I imagine that comes back to the way in which you ask questions and listen to various things that you might talk about. But are there any clues you can give us about how would you identify whether the person coming into the conversation, the coaching conversation with you, actually has the answer? They simply don't know where the answer is. It's somewhere hidden.
Yeah. I mean, it depends a bit on the nature of the issue, of course. I think sometimes the issue at hand is something where you just need to know a fact, and then it's solved. About, these people can help you, that they have the resources, they have the information, they have a bit more of an inside view of the client, maybe. But it's more about a stance, the stance of coaching. When you talk about more formal coaching, where you work a bit more long term with someone rather than just a 5-minute conversation. So the stance really means that that's your starting point, that the person has the answer to the problem. Unless it's something of these more technical things, and that you work with them to find it, so that you hold back, and that's really one of the key learning areas for, in particular, line managers to learn with coaching, is to shift and hold back. So basically to switch from tell into ask. And it's really about how can you stay in the asking coaching mode for longer. And there will be a time where you have to switch into tell and mentoring. The house is on fire, of course. But if there is a coaching window, a coaching opportunity, and that's the skill, to recognize the coaching window. When is it a good time to coach? When can we go a bit more into development and preparing for the future, so you don't have repeat behavior patterns that cause problems the next quarter again?
Yeah, it's really sort of really interesting. And I think that a lot of people kind of say that they find it difficult to go into that sort of coaching mindset when their natural inclination is to tell, this is, and of course, if you're a line manager and you've got, a sales representative coming to you with a problem, you go into that more mentoring role, perhaps more than the coaching role. But I think that ability to there's a word that you use, sort of non-judgmental. I
Yeah,
don't think that was a word that you used, but not
and
to prejudge is a very
yeah,
important word as well that you use.
yeah.
Unconditional. Was it? I can't remember.
Unconditional positive regard, and
Yeah,
yeah, it,
unconditional positive
mm,
regard was an
mm,
interesting. Yeah, just a great. Yeah, just a great phrase, actually. When we talk about our leadership mindsets on
mhm,
the master's program, the sales mindsets have been, I think everyone's probably heard me on the podcast talk about them so often, but the leadership mindsets that we came up with, based on working with 200 sales managers, so we got them to do a kind of superhero exercise, and we
mhm,
talk about vision, personal vision you have as a leader. Then we talk about desire to be the best, because we're in a performance orientated function. Then we had empowerment and potential.
yeah,
And I think what you're talking about here sort of fits into the potential area.
yeah,
What is the potential of individuals? It's
mm,
finding or helping individuals find
mm,
that unrealized potential through the way in which you might be coaching them on a particular topic.
mm. Yeah, and it's both within themselves. So, what resources do they have within themselves, but also in the context? And I thought maybe I should say a few more words about how systemic coaching actually works,
Okay.
and the constellation methods, because that speaks to that, I think. So, I mean, basically, what happens is that you think about what is the question you want to think about, what's the issue or the opportunity, what would be different if you would make progress on that. And then you reduce the complexity in thinking, okay, what are the 5 things I need to consider to make progress on this? So that could be people like yourself or others, so individuals, it could be groups of people like teams, the own team, cross-functional teams, customers, suppliers, whoever it is, partners. Or it could be things, and things can be many things. It can be products, services, solutions. Um, it can be concrete things. It can be abstract things. It can be goals. It can be values. It can be emotions as well. Yeah, so anxiety is a big one. That's sort of one of the articles I wrote on anxiety in sales being a systemic dynamic that's often passed through the different
Mm-hmm.
teams or the different hierarchy levels as well. So basically you map out what are the 5 things. It's a bit like scientists isolating factors. So I'm getting a bit more involved with scientists now, and so it's that language. If you were to map and visualize the problem with 5 things, so write it on your post-its, or you can use little objects to represent them. What is it you need to consider? And then typically people have either they have people on it or groups of people if it's very much if they want to think about a conflict. But if you think more about the strategy or resources or how you change your product portfolio, you map all these out. And then the beauty of the method is that you can explore the relationship between people and things, like the loyalty to products, sometimes making those decisions about letting something go. And I've seen this so many times where people hang on to products and services that really doesn't make commercial sense. So it brings out that personal loyalty that is unhelpful to things, teams, solutions, etc. Partners as well, contacts. So it's really looking at that, what isn't working, but also what is, what is the driver, what are the values, what are the resources, the opportunity, the potential. So you map those out and you map out the relationship between them, and that's a lot of the visual thinking techniques, management techniques, they do work in that way as well, but they're still quite 2D, they're often quite linear. So
Yeah.
what we're doing here is really looking at where is the orientation. So where the attention goes, the energy flows. It's become a bit of a business buzzword or business line, but it really is true. Where your attention is, that's where your energy goes and that's
Yeah.
where your attention goes. So, for example, the sales managers, are they focused on deals, or are they focused into the rest of the organization to get resources, to create conditions for the team, coaching the sales managers? So it's a typical mapping. Are they too much into what they used to do before they got promoted? So a typical scenario here. So you map that out. So you map out your question in a visual relationship system. And then you analyze the dynamics. What's it like to be here in the system? You map out you inquire into the individual elements that you have mapped. And when I work with my mapping, I use speech bubble post-it notes and get people to write down, what's it like to be here? And now I even simplified it. So I didn't invent this method. It comes from Germany, where it's a very big consultancy practice, coaching practice. But what I added to it is working with more visuals. So I get people to write emojis. Everyone can draw an emoji. What is really the core essence of being here? Are people frustrated, bored, excited, anxious, these kind of things? And that's really this below the waterline level dynamic. Why aren't they moving forward? Why are they procrastinating? And you might think they can't be bothered, but often it's actually anxiety that's behind it, or a lack of skills, or whatever. So so you map that out, and it's really that, how are people orientated? How are the elements that you've mapped? Where's the dynamic going? How close are they? So we're developing a bit of a grammar of visual representation. And that's where my company name comes from, Moving Maps, is that you map out the now and then you move things around. What would be better? So if you move this resource here, how would these people feel? And maybe they feel even worse. So you check in then, is it better, worse, or the same? So you hypothesize the solutions. And because we're working visually, the power of the method is that people go away with a picture of their solution. So one of the quotes, actually, people said, it strengthens your resolve because you have seen what you're working towards. If you work on a tabletop with post-its or objects, you can also work on the floor. So I work with floor markers. You just put a piece of paper and you actually stand in the customer's shoes and see what's it like to be in relationship with you or your team, your company, or the product, whatever it is. So it's that really deeper analysis of the challenges, but also the solutions. So you explore then the solution that you think might solve all the problems or might take advantage of all the opportunities. But then again, you go into the positions of the different elements and see, so what's it like here now? Is it better, the same, or worse? And it just gives us that different perspective. It's shifting thinking and perspectives.
Yeah, I'm very quite a visual person myself, so I think it's a very powerful. I can see it's a very powerful tool. And as you were talking, I was thinking of some of the reflective techniques that we kind of teach on the programs. Exactly. And you talk about the 5 topics, and of course there's the 5 whys, but it's very two-dimensional or even one-dimensional as a particular framework. And I can see that that having sort of multi-dimensional aspect to it actually is an additional level of reflection that you can do to uncover. I guess, I mean, in a way, it's problem solving, isn't it? Through a coaching mindset. Is that how you see it? And possibly
that's right.
Better to do it with a team than with an individual, or can you see it working both at an individual level and in groups?
Yeah. It's a very adaptable method. So so it's 3D. If you work on the table with post-it mapping or objects, little objects, if you have little figurines you can use, it's 3D. But if you do the things on the floor where you stand in the shoes of the different elements, it's almost 4D. So you use kind of the big data of the body, someone called it. You use your own experience and your sense. What's it like to be maybe your future employee, etc. So so one-to-one coaching, I use it a lot. And for myself, it's sometimes I don't even map with the clients, but it's informing my thinking. In my head, I think systemically, or I make my notes in that sense, that I map out what are the actors that are involved here, how are they orientated towards each other, etc. And then with teams, so with teams, that's something to be careful with. You can use it with teams. It works best if you use it for topics where you explore the relationship of the team with others, or kind of, you can use it for process re-engineering, things like that. But you have to be careful. I would say don't use it, unless you're fully trained, etc. Don't use it for the team on itself, because that can unearth really deep emotions and a lot of conflict, etc. So it's not really designed for that. So typically you work with the leader on understanding their team better. So for example, where have they come from? Who joined first? Who does another one of the articles? You look at the team tenure. How long have people been in the team? Where have they come from? They've come from the little startup. They've come from the corporate sort of, maybe it was a hostile takeover. Or so all these dynamics, they play out decades later. So that helps for the leader to understand the team and their relationship to the team. But I wouldn't use it for the team to map themselves, really. It's more about topics they want to work through, more operational things, strategy, whatever. It's used in industry in all sorts of contexts. Yeah. And I just give one example. You can use it. So, for example, that's a real use case. So I worked with a team that wanted to improve how they're perceived by the rest of the organization. So a global corporate. So they mapped themselves how they're now. So I got the individuals to map how they see the team in relationship to the rest of the organization. So they externalized 5 different pictures so they could compare and share their internal views. So it makes it shareable through working visually. And then they agreed on one, what they really wanted to work towards in relationship to the rest of the organization. So improving their reputation as a global team. So we're getting in quite a lot of detail here now. So
I love the
that
detail.
level you definitely need some training. So I think that the quick mapping, that the core article I wrote about mapping the solution, that is something everyone can do. Line managers can do for themselves. Map some issues with the teams. Sort of the more of where it's more about not about people issues so much, but things that we need to do, processes, operations, etc. So understanding the customer, these kind of things, that's something that's quite fast to learn, really, and easy to do.
And just for the benefit of the listeners, we in the show notes to the podcast, we are going to put links to some of the published articles that you've had, Claudia, which have a very useful kind of support. Can I ask you, if you were looking at sort of what is the one superpower of what a great coach is, what would it be? What would be the superpower be?
Well, it's the core of Consalia, reflection.
Reflection.
So it's really reflection. Critical reflection is the core skill, because what you do with others is questioning and listening. So that's the kind of mechanics. But the reflection makes the coaching really effective, because you become a better understanding of yourself. So in the learning journey, the starting point really is to understand yourself, your personality, what you bring to coaching. Again, often people are very focused on the other person, but you need to understand yourself, because you are interacting with the other person. And then you notice the other person too. But basically, coaching is very much co-created. So it brings us to that notion: are there good or bad questions? So when I train coaches, they often say, they're often really concerned about asking good questions. And I really don't buy into that good or bad question. I think it's more helpful, more useful to think about effective questions, questions that are impactful, that turn insight into action, because it's co-created. The question you ask really comes through the interaction with the other person. So there is a phenomenon called the parallel process. For example, if you feel stuck, and you're not quite sure what to ask next, or you're confused, that often is a reflection on the coachee feeling stuck and feeling confused. So I think that's why the reflection is so important, so you can notice what's going on in the situation and adapt how you interact. You are aware of yourself, you are aware of the other person, and you can accelerate your learning. So after the coaching session, highly recommended to take notes and really then inquire what went well, what could have been done, and again, maybe not well, but what's been useful, what could have been more useful, what happened, what are the facts, why might it happen, doing the analysis or going through the reflective cycle, and what do you want to try differently next time. So I think reflection is just the core leadership competency.
Yeah.
To accelerate learning, manage complexity, etc., and that underlies coaching too. Yeah,
it's we often say on the master's programs, it's the core, that is the core skill that we teach, no matter what module you're on, the underlying sort of critical reflection. And all of the work about autobiographical listening, and I think some of the techniques, we haven't maybe positioned it as a coaching technique, but things like appreciative inquiry and some of those techniques are quite, and some of the visualization things that we do on the program, I think, haven't really seen it through the lens of coaching, as you've described, the techniques, but I can see that they all support this notion of what will contribute to being a good coach. So by the time they get to the coaching module, which is module 3, they've gone through quite a lot of the critical reflection. They've explored their own values and belief systems. So, but what's really interesting when we get to that particular module after taking them on this journey is how so many people come onto the coaching module coming out of it with a completely different perception of what coaching is or coaching isn't. And even though they've been on coaching programs before, and I must admit that feedback surprises me quite often. And I
mean, I think in the sales space and in other spaces too, right? So that's what I know from being involved in research. There are certain coaching practices that can be a bit more directive, a bit more closer to mentoring for the reasons we talked about earlier. You need to make a decision quickly. You're sort of coaching on the opportunity as well, etc. You have a process to follow. So it's about developing the skills to follow the sales process and managing the opportunity or the territory really well. So developing those sales skills. So it's skills coaching as well. So I think it's probably to do with that, and also because often mentoring is called coaching, and it actually really is mentoring. So that's quite common. But I found really, when I got first involved 15 years ago, I really had to explain coaching a lot. People hadn't even heard of it. And now I find people have had it, know it. Very often people have their own coaches as well. So again, that's what's the role of coaching in the world. There's a big appetite for coaching. People are really bought into self-development.
It is. I mean, it's a privilege to be a coach, and it's also a privilege to be coached in a way. It's incredibly important. I remember myself being coached during the pandemic as part of, I think, one of your students, actually, Claudia.
That's right.
with Joe, I think it was. And that I found that really, really helpful. And we explored at the time coaching, it particularly in a critical what does a leader need to do in a critical situation? And the pandemic was critical. We had, and I found it very interesting to sort of go on that self-reflective journey about what can I learn about managing and leading in a critical environment. And apart from the coaching, I was encouraged to kind of look at different theories of leadership, and it helped inform my own practice. I found that a really sort of useful exercise to do. Actually, it was really useful. I'm just looking at time, and we're getting to the end of our allotted time, Claudia. I know we could talk a lot more, but there's something which I'd really have begun to get intrigued with, which is the choice of words, even, and how a word can turn a conversation. And in particular, the work of Professor Liz Stokoe. I don't know if you've come across her at Loughborough University, and she's now at LSE, but she's done a huge amount of work on how individual words can turn a conversation. And she's able to use some quite sophisticated technology to analyze, for example, in a crisis negotiation or someone phoning in to a 999 call. And, you're able to look at data and you look at what words open people up and what words close people down. And it's an area that I'm beginning to kind of explore for myself, because I can see how sometimes individual words can change a conversation so dramatically for the positive or the negative. And I'm not sure whether that's something we can talk about at some future stage, maybe, but I'd be really interested to maybe explore that area.
Yeah, certainly. And that's where research really helps, that we really understand what impact the interventions we choose have. And there is a lot of work, a lot of coaching techniques have a legacy from the therapy world. So there's a lot of research around using clean language. That's one of the coaching techniques that's based on metaphors, staying with the words of the clients and not adding much actually, but really, really working with what the client gives you. And that sort of has shown to shift people. Working with metaphors has been really helpful in that sense. And so I think that's the link to the reflection, that we're aware of what the impact is of what we're doing. And it also links a bit to this notion of the leader as the collective coach. So developing yourself as a coach doesn't just impact on how you coach, but it impacts on how you coach yourself. So that's, I feel so strongly about investing in leader as coach development is so beneficial, not just to make people coach others, but also to give them these self-reflective capabilities. And we had a lovely feedback in one of the Consalia Leader as a Coach training programs we did, where someone said it just really changed even how he formulates an email, how he approaches a team meeting. So really shifted the thinking and the reflection on how you interact with others. So it's that the leader as the collective coach idea, which I think is very powerful.
So if I could sort of summarize some of the themes that we've kind of spoken about, is this idea of critical reflection and self-reflection. Of course, we've gone into some really interesting sort of techniques of visualization, which, you with your company, Moving Maps Limited, has kind of clearly that's an important sort of area. It's been really interesting to hear you speak about how those techniques can help people, sort of unravel, unravel problems, complex problems in a simple way.
And unblock as well,
and unblock potential for action, as a particular process. I think that's been really, really helpful and insightful. And your guidance as to the team coaching aspect was really interesting as well. I mean, there's lots of takeaways that I think I've taken from this conversation, but Are there any final comments you'd like to make before we close the podcast off, Claudia?
Yeah, I think just to invest in developing coaching as a skill. So investing in reflection and reading about it, because it changes and widens the perspective, but actually the doing. So doing lots of coaching, so you build that muscle, so it becomes more natural and you stay in coaching mode for longer. So asking mode, listening mode instead of telling. That's really helpful. Yeah, and it's really beneficial for not just coaching others, but self-reflection too.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, Claudia, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again at some future stage. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, likewise, Phil. So it's been a real pleasure. I always learn so much myself, and really thanks a lot for the invite. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you.